Hello, my name is Alan Singer. I'm a professor of education and history at Hofstra University, located in the New York City metropolitan area. I'm videoing myself in my home office because of the coronavirus quarantine here. This presentation, Promoting Student Activism Through Civics Education, is drawn from a book, Supporting Civics Education with Student Activism. I am co-writing with my friend and colleague Pablo Muriel. Is scheduled to be published by Routledge. The world faces a number of serious crises. Over the last 200 years, virtually unregulated capitalist industrialization has polluted land, water, and air, and produced climate changes that threaten to become a climate catastrophe. The lives of billions of people are endangered by global warming, intensified storms, prolonged droughts, rising sea levels, and depleted food and fresh water reserves. In recent decades, globalization has produced enormous regional inequalities and increasing income and wealth gap in many more advanced economies. It is unclear what work will look like in the future and how people will earn their livelihoods as new technologies make human workers obsolete in many fields. War is endemic to many regions of the world, but especially in latitudes between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer. Climate change, income inequality, war, and technological displacement contribute to a massive wave of migration from poorer regions of the world to more advanced and stable economic sectors, creating a political backlash in many countries that has fueled right-wing ethno-nationalist movements, a resurgence that recalls the rise of fascism in the 1930s. Many countries, including the United States, were unprepared for the corona pandemic because governments were unprepared and private enterprise does not step into the void unless it sees opportunities for short-term profit. I am not a religious man, but sometimes it seems like we are living through a remix of the biblical 10 plagues from the book of Exodus. Young people today confront a world they did not create and with serious problems the adults in their lives, parents, family members, teachers, and political leaders have been unable to resolve. Swedish teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg warns, "Our house is on fire." Pablo and I consider ourselves lifetime political activists as well as teachers. The question we confront as teachers and activists is, how do we best prepare a new generation to be active participants in preserving and transforming a democratic society, generating solutions that meet the needs of people domestically, respects and heals the environments, and promotes international cooperation to address the needs of people across the globe? In answer to this question, we argue that supporting student activism as teachers must be a fundamental component of civics education. What distinguishes social activism from service learning is advocacy to change institutional policy, where the institution is a school or a school district, a corporation, or a local state or national government. Collecting food and clothing after an environmental disaster, hurricane relief, is a service learning project, but it becomes social activism when students petition school or district officials to permit or even embrace student involvement. Former United States Supreme Court Associate Justice Louis Brandeis is widely quoted saying, "The only title in our democracy superior to that of president is the title of citizen." As teachers and citizens, we agree with Brandeis. We believe it is fundamental to our jobs as teachers to engage students in examining the implications of citizenship in a democratic society, which requires encouraging student activism as part of experiential learning. Even the youngest students can be involved in civic action projects. In the United States, the National Council for the Social Studies, in its College Career and Civic Life framework, argues that producing knowledgeable, thinking, and active citizens is essential for preservation of a democratic society. This means that, quote, students need the intellectual power to recognize societal problems, ask good questions, and develop robust investigations into them, consider possible solutions and consequences, separate evidence-based claims from patriarchal opinions, and communicate and act upon what they learn. Student mastery of civic ideals is measured by their ability to, again quote, apply a range of deliberative and democratic strategies and procedures to make decisions and take action in their classrooms, schools, and out-of-school civic contexts. We interpret act upon what they learn in out-of-school civic contexts as a call for informed student political action. There is a rich philosophic tradition in American education and other countries that supports student civic and political activism. 1932, during the Great Depression, George Counts, a professor at Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City, issued a challenge to teachers and all of America. He called it, "Dare the School Build a New Social Order." Counts believed that schools could play a transformative role in creating a more just society. He called on educators to, quote, pay the costs of leadership, to accept responsibility, to suffer calumny, to surrender security, to risk both reputation and future, to promote progressive social change. John Dewey, one of the most influential thinkers about education in United States history, offered suggestions for a pedagogy that makes it possible to engage students in changing institutions that appear as imposing and unchangeable. Key to Dewey's approach to education was recognizing that there is a, quote, organic connection between education and experience. As an advocate for democracy, Dewey understood that students must experience democracy. By extension, active citizenship in a democratic society means that students must personally experience the power of activism to understand its implications to the fullest. Brazilian educator Paulo Freire dedicated his life to supporting efforts by the world's poor and oppressed to acquire educational experiences to take control over their lives. Freire argued that progressive educational and social goals can only be achieved when students explicitly critique social injustice and actively organize to challenge oppression. Two European thinkers who influenced our understanding of schools as institutions and our approach to teaching are French critical theorist Michel Foucault and 20th century Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. Writing in different eras and from different perspectives, Foucault and Gramsci examine schools as institutions that support the power and economic relationships of society by acculturating students into the social system that created the educational institutions and that schools are designed to support. However, while schools as institutions may appear monolithic and virtually unbreachable in their work, Foucault and Gramsci offer the possibility of an opening for potential movements for institutional and social change. Foucault sees inherent resistance endemic in all institutions in conflict over the legitimacy of knowledge and over social controls. For Foucault, resistance is a key component in the function of power, but also a source of its perpetual disorder. Gramsci argues that working class organic intellectuals who develop a critical understanding of the oppressive nature of society and its institutions can act as a conduit between revolutionary parties and oppressed classes and groups and emerge as natural leaders of oppositional forces in society. Student activism and its ability to contribute to the transformation of society is not a new phenomenon. Two of the most powerful examples are the role played by secondary school students in the campaign against apartheid in South Africa and in the African American civil rights movement in the United States. By 1976, much of the leadership of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa was either in prison or had been murdered by police and military forces. In June, tens of thousands of secondary school students marched in a Soweto protest against a government decision to force their schools to use Afrikaans as the language of instruction instead of English. The students were brutally attacked by police who opened fire using live ammunition and murdered at least 176 young people, although estimates for deaths run as high as 700. The student protest and police response sparked international condemnation of apartheid and contributed to its downfall and majority rule in South Africa today. June 16th, the day of the Soweto protest and police attack, is now a national holiday, Youth Day in South Africa. The May 1963 Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama, had a similar cathartic impact on the African American civil rights movement. With adults threatened with losing jobs for participating in protests, and many of the movement's leaders jailed, activists enlisted students, including younger children, for marches demanding the desegregation of Birmingham parks and public facilities. Hundreds of students were arrested on the first day of the campaign. On the second day, they were attacked by police with high-pressure fire hoses and dogs when they tried to enter a white-only park. The police assault, broadcast on national television and widely covered in the press, was a turning point in the African American struggle for civil rights in the United States. Greta Thunberg has electrified the world with her speeches and international forums demanding climate action. But the campaign by young people demanding climate awareness actually predates Greta by almost 3 decades. In 1992, a group of Canadian 12 and 13-year-olds representing the Environmental Children's Organization traveled to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to address a United Nations Earth Summit. Severin Kulis Suzuki told attendees at the summit, "I am fighting for my future. I am here to speak for all generations to come." Severin challenged delegates as parents who should be able to comfort their children by saying, "Everything is going to be all right. We're doing the best we can, and it's not the end of the world." But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. Today, democracy itself appears to be at risk in many nations, including the United States. In a September 1820 letter, former President Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, argued that an educated people were the best defense of democracy and liberty in the new nation. To quote Jefferson, "I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but inform their discretion." This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. Perhaps the best known statement demanding activism in response to injustice was by Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller after World War II. Niemöller writes, "In Germany, the Nazis first came for